Welcome to Its Four Sides of Leadership. I'm Coach Colin and I'm here to help you master your leadership. Where are you on your journey in becoming the leader that is really leading your team to success in an effective way? Maybe you've already been talking around the north with your team and you've communicated the future goals and everybody agrees about what has to change and why it is important. And that would be great. So let's quickly look at what would happen next. Because in the next phase, you would want to turn east when you really want to jump out of bed and get things started. And to be able to do that, that's where you want to decide on the present priority. Because if that priority is unclear, then you might get busy on the wrong things. And you know that that is not the picture of an effective leader that you want to have. You want to really know what are the key things that you want to get started on. And of course, when action happens, maybe things go south as well. And in the south, you would want to coach your people to act in line with the priorities that you have decided on. And finally, in the evening, when you turn west and enjoy a sundowner while you look at the sunset, of course, you want to follow up on the past results. Today, we're going to have a look at how you really decide on the present priority, because I've discovered that many leaders leave this section over to their team. They think that, okay, this is the team discussion around how they would want to achieve the goals after the goals have been agreed upon. But what I've also noticed is that is not quite really true, because when the team gets started in this area, you know what a team discussion looks like, because in a team you always have moments and elements of hierarchy, which means you've got strong leaders in the team who would like to push their ideas and weaker ones who don't really communicate and just step back, and others who are sort of in the middle and they're undecided. And when that happens, you end up in having discussions, prolonged arguments around things, because it's a lot about, well, in this team, who gets really what. But the key question that your team is trying to answer is, how are we going to solve this as a team? And rather than letting your team decide on their own, I would like to invite you to help them to decide on the present priority, because when you help them, you might be able to guide that discussion around a more rational perspective of what needs to be done and what the strategy should really look like. That is why today we're going to talk about the global strategy enabler in more detail, because that is what the EAST is about. Because with this global strategy enabler, there comes a number of models and methods and tools that will allow you to guide your team effectively through this phase, so that everybody knows, how are we going to do this now? So to get started, maybe it would be a good idea to write EAST on a piece of paper here on the left, from top to bottom, taking the letters EAST, because this is what it's about. This is how the team will see how they should be getting started in the EAST in the morning when they get out of bed, so they know, how are we going to do this? And in the EAST, there are 4 models and tools that we will be talking about. The first one is the End in Mind Strategy Enabler. And this End in Mind Strategy Enabler, as the word says, is going to start with the end in mind and develop a strategy for you. The second thing is the Adaptive Strategy Creator, because the strategy is not only a list of activities and actions and deadlines. You really want to create that balance so that all the resources are used so that you can move forward in achieving your goal. And as there are many elements in your strategy that will require decisions, and many decisions with your team, it would be a good idea to have a look at the Safe Decision Grabber, because with the Safe Decision Grabber, you will have a method to run the decision meetings in an effective way, so that you actually don't need to schedule a second meeting because you ran out of time at the end of a decision meeting. I'm quite sure you've noticed that has happened on occasions. And finally, there is the transparent facts delegator. Now, the transparent facts delegator is very useful because in certain situations you have your team members not all present in the meeting, which means that some of the team members need to get this information. You need to delegate the information so that they can get started on the actions that are important. And this element is very often neglected, which means that you might be expecting your team to do things, but individuals in your team are still unclear around the tasks that they should have because nobody has really told them and delegated to them what they should be doing. So today we will have a look at the End in Mind Strategy Planner. In detail, the End in Mind Strategy Planner is supposed to help you create a plan so that you really achieve your goals. And maybe you have heard about the proverb from Dwight Eisenhower, who once said, "If you fail to plan, you plan to fail." But what does that really mean? Have you thought about that? Well, one part is it, if you fail to plan, which means if you don't plan, then of course you're going to fail. But the other part of this also means that if you don't have a good plan, you could also fail. So that is why with End in Mind Strategy Planner, I would like to share with you the elements that are required so that you have a good plan. And before I do that, let's have a look at this picture here. This picture is actually the front garden of my house with the main entrance, and you can see these 4 steps leading up to the front doorstep. And one day I decided that the sloping gravel path was a little boring. I really wanted to have some interesting feature there in my front garden. I wanted to have some steps going up there. So you can imagine planning steps is like having a project plan, which means that you want to decide how high you want to go and you want to decide how far you have to go, right? And maybe you have gone up some flights of steps in the end where the last step all of a sudden was a little higher than all the other steps and you tripped just because somebody didn't plan properly. And my wife made it very clear to me that she didn't want to have those types of steps. She wanted to have even steps going up, reaching to our front doorstep. So how do you do that? Well, you have to plan for it, obviously. And in the following process, the End in Mind Strategy Planner explains exactly the steps that I did and explains exactly the steps that you can do to create a project plan that reaches your target. So to do that, let's write plan here on the left of a piece of paper, P-L-A-N, and we'll take it step by step to see what are the elements to make this End in Mind Strategy Planner. Because what I did is literally what you want to do in your project as well. The first thing that you would want to do, you want to stand there at the doorstep, in my case, at the end of the project, and you would want to picture the outcome. Just imagine what it's going to feel like going up 4 steps up to the front door. What is it going to feel like, the feeling of treading on these nice wooden steps with the feature around in the garden, how it's integrated into the shrubs and the flowers and everything. You can do exactly the same thing with your project because you can ask the people, what is it going to be like? What is it going to be in place? What is going to be functioning? What are people going to say? What image are you going to have? All these things that we can imagine around this outcome is relevant to picture what it's really going to be like when you are there. And that is what it's required to create the motivation to really go through the effort and build all the different steps of that plan. Because you can imagine, if I couldn't imagine what it would be like here at the final element of my steps, of course, why should I do the effort in creating those steps when I have a gravel walkway which works just the same? So picture the outcome is the first thing. The second thing I did was that from the moment of picturing the outcome, standing at my front doorstep, I actually turned around and then looked down to the road and linearized the steps going down to the road. And I thought, well, how many steps do I want to have? Do I want 3? Do I want 4? And you are going to do the same thing for your project, because your deadline for the project in a certain moment in time gives you a certain space in time, how much time you have from where you stand today. And if your project is a year, it gives you 12 months, it gives you 4 quarters. If your project is 3 months, it gives you 3 months. So this way you can linearize your timeline moving downwards back to the beginning by deciding how many milestones they're going to be. And it's very easy to do that just by looking at the number of months or weeks you have, and then take like 3, 4, perhaps 6 steps and say, okay, these will be the milestones that I need to develop going back to the front, stepping backwards. Now, the next thing that has to happen is that now you know you've got 4 steps. In my case, it was 4 steps. Now I start standing there at my doorstep, and now I start stepping backwards, which means I have to think about, okay, well, what is the last things now I have to put into place before I close it all up and reach my doorstep? And this process is important because there are things, sort of the requirements that have to happen in that final step. For me, it was I had to put down electricity so that the lights work, and I have to connect it to the sockets so that there's power there. This was the last thing I would be doing before I put the wood onto the final step. And for your project, there are also last things that you would be doing, and these last things are different to the things that you would be doing the step before. So with every step, you would want to admit there are certain requirements that have to happen at that moment in time so that the project actually can deliver onto the next step. And this way, step by step, depending on how many milestones you have, you define the number of prerequisites of requirements stepping backwards. And of course, at the beginning of my project, it was all about getting the material and the tools in place. The second thing was, of course, to get all the gravel and all the ground leveled before I could start building. So this way, you can decide step by step what are the requirements going backwards. And this is the end in mind strategy planner, because you want to start with the end in mind and define what has to happen before I can take the next step. Because if you just take a forward planning type of project approach, you might think about a lot of ideas that you have right now, but you don't know which one you would want to do at the beginning and which one you would want to do at the third step. Which means that you might be wasting time at the beginning doing things that are not relevant at the time, or when you reach the third step, you might have missed certain things, which means you get very busy at the third step by trying to complete the gaps that are left that you've discovered at that moment, which means that your whole project timeline is going to be jeopardized. So by planning backwards, step by step, defining the requirements step by step, you know what is needed at every step. And now you can go into a detailed planning moving forwards, where you have a look at those pre-requirements, and then you step forward and say, okay, now what has to happen in detail? Now you can do an action list of those things that should happen in this step, so to speak. Now you know within the next milestone, within the next month, these are the things I have to work on, and these are the things that have to be done so that it creates a prerequisite for the next step. So this is the end in mind strategy planner that ensures that you create a series of milestones and a series of prerequisites and requirements so that your project actually hits the mark. And that is the end in mind strategy planner, with picturing the end in mind, with linearizing the steps, admitting what is required in every step, and taking note moving forward. You can do this on your own, on a piece of paper, just thinking, or you can literally, like I showed here, literally take steps and think, okay, this is the end of the year, this is sort of the quarter before, and this is the second quarter, this is summer, what has to happen there? And when you do that, you discover all of a sudden that, okay, maybe certain things have to happen in parallel. So there might be a sub-project that is happening at the same time. For me, it was like creating the gravel on the side and the edges and the shrubs so that it looks nicely as well. That has to be synchronized with the different milestones in your project. But the difference is, now you know in detail what has to come first and what has to come second. And when I did this exercise with a group of managers, they suddenly felt much more relaxed and calm, because before we did the exercise, they had, of course, the end in mind, what they wanted to achieve, but they also had all the activities in mind at the same time, because everything had to be done. But by putting it in a deliberate sequence, from stepping backwards and planning it forward, they could now relax and say, right, now there are 3 things that have to happen in the next quarter. And when those 3 things have happened, they create the prerequisite for the next 3 things that have to happen the next quarter. Now your team can relax. Now you can relax. You can focus on the things that are very important, still knowing that you plan to reach your target. So these are the elements around the strategy planner. I hope you enjoyed this little video, and always start from the end in mind. Thank you very much. This gives you an overview of the elements of the Global Strategy Planner and what else we're going to cover around its 4 sides of leadership.